Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help ambitious private practitioners across the globe to brand themselves and grow their dream practices. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building ninja tips. Visit privatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and our signature marketing e-course. Here are your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. And we are excited you're here. Always excited you're here, and always excited to bring you really good information and content, things that we love, things that we know that you guys are needing, wanting, and loving. Today we welcome Jen Fredette, and I'll tell you a little bit about Jen and what we'll be talking about in just a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to welcome you. If you are a first-time guest, we're so excited that you're here. And we have a gift for you that is our attorney-approved customizable HIPAA form. Head on over to privatepracticestartup.com, slide on over to that resource tab, I should say. There's a bunch of resources there, and there you will see it standing right out. So go ahead and grab that, and feel free to grab anything else that you see would be helpful to you. And also, I hope last week you joined us, and if you didn't, we had another great success story with Jordan Zipkin, and that's Jordan's success story about where he is now. We always love these; they're so inspirational to really hear our coachees' stories, where they've evolved, and they really do provide a lot of inspiration for you guys too. So definitely join us for that. And loyal listeners, welcome back. It is great to have you here joining us today. Today we are talking about marketing is a relationship. Jen must have already knew our hearts, because this is what we talk about all the time. And we're going to be talking about speaking to your ideal client one sentence at a time. A little bit about Jen. Jen is a relational, psychodynamic oriented, attachment-based, loving Jungian concept, adoring and existential thinking psychotherapist based in the DC metro area. Woo, that was a mouthful. In addition to her clinical work, Jen partners with psychotherapists who want to market with depth, not just offer quick solutions to get people in the door. Jen is passionate about her cats, Regency romance novels, and about dismantling the obstacles that get in the way of people exploring their own psyches. You can follow her on Instagram at A Thinker's Guide, and on her podcast, A Thinker's Guide to ... And that's Jen. Welcome, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of copy for you to read too, so I appreciate how eloquently you did so.
I think I should have took a little bit of deeper breath at the beginning so I could fully get it all in one.
I love a good run-on sentence. So.
Girl, my emails are all run-on sentences. Thankfully, Kate knows me this many years now. It's just the thing that you accept about people.
It's funny. Katie and I have to decipher our text sometimes. When Katie's texting me and she's dictating, it will send me the craziest things. And I'm like, okay, I know what Katie's trying to say here, but the way it's coming across is totally different. So yeah, it's always entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you so much for, being part of the therapist community in this aspect, because one of the messages Kate and I really love to share with therapists is how amazing marketers they are. And the reality is we have so many skills, and we always talk about reframing marketing as a relationship, and talking about something that you love and you're passionate about, and then marketing becomes easy. It's no longer this big scary thing out there in the world that you have to do in order to have a successful business. So where should we kind of always like to just dive in a little bit, like about your story. Like, how did you become a therapist? And also, how did you get really excited about this specific area and helping therapists?
So I'm the queen of resistance. I've been through what it feels like multiple careers before actually becoming a therapist. And so in undergrad, I was a religion major, which is essentially code for being a humanities major, but not having to take all of the history classes. I took a lot of psych classes. I took a lot of English classes, and loved religion, not to try to convert everybody to Jesus, but that there are these stories we tell that are really powerful and dictate how we do live our lives and how we don't live our lives. And so I really loved unfolding the stories, and kept getting told, you should be a therapist. It's like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go get a PhD in biblical literature. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to do all of these things. Got there, loved it, played around a little bit with church ministry, have a pretty foul mouth, and do not like lock-ins, which is something you've got to do if you're a youth minister. And realized over time what I really loved was actually helping people dismantle their story and understanding what are the stories we tell ourselves, about others, and what are the stories underneath those stories that are really driving what we often talk about in terms of the unconscious. So then I went to grad school again to go and get my master's in counseling, and have been practicing, I guess almost 7 or 8 years now. So for a while, have a full caseload that I love. I do long-term depth work with people, and really, again, helping them uncover what are the stories underneath the stories you tell yourself and other people. So that's how I ended up as a therapist. In terms of marketing, what was so fascinating to me as I started to delve into marketing, it was just, again, telling people a story, right? Mm-hmm. Being able to talk on Psych Today, here is where you're starting, here's your problem, and I have a solution for you. It's not an easy fix. It's not just a CBT technique and 10 sessions or less, you're okay, which there are people who are brilliant at that, and I am terrible. I never remember to print out worksheets. I have all of these books. I'm like, I have the stuff I could give you, but I just am not. I don't have my stuff together. But really wanted to help people what happens when you already have the skill, but you're still not getting where you want to be. And so writing copy was so fun and so exciting. And I didn't hang out with enough therapists to discover that we're supposed to hate it and that we're all supposed to moan and whine and be like, this is the worst thing ever. I hate it. I don't want to put myself out there. Like, I just didn't have therapist friends who cared like that. And as I did more and more, I started to realize that I'm pretty good at it. And I'm pretty good at helping people reframe what it is that we have to offer. A lot of the work I've done with clients, everybody feels like a client, not just therapy clients, but coaching clients, has been like, you actually have something so valuable to offer. And it's not just name dropping Brené Brown or talking about authenticity or trying to convince people that they should come see you with all of your credentials. You already know what secrets they're keeping from themselves, and you know how to write that. You just need to put it down. And I know you know how to write it because you told your client that 3 sessions ago. So that's how I've gotten here, of helping partner with people to write copy that really captivates and converts ideal clients. So you get to do the work you really love to do.
I love that. And I had chills as you were talking about that. And it's so exciting. And, you know, this is one of the things that Kay and I talk about. I would literally keep a notepad. Well, it was for other things, but sometimes there'd be a good conversation or even like a topic or whatever. And I would just, I'd maintain eye contact with the client, and I'd slip my hand under the table, grab the paper, and I'd do the nonverbal encouragement. Yeah. Okay. And I'm writing down like that 1 or 2 words. And it's like, oh, and you're so right. Like, copy really is stuff that you're talking about all the time anyway, you know, and therapists really don't get that and realize that.
And I think part of the thing that's tricky about copy is it is conversational, but you all were talking about texting before, and I'm like, oh, I'm like the worst texter because I'm not good at emojis. And like everybody sends, I don't even know if it's GIF or Giphy or whatever these things are called. I'm so bad at sending them. Like, text copy is like not my foray. I try, but I'm just not very good at it. And depending on where we're having the conversation, how it's formatted, how it is that we translate it changes. So what we do face to face, like the kind of conversation we're having, isn't always going to translate to the written page in the same way. And even when you're reading my bio, I was like, oh, I probably should have read that out loud a couple times since people are going to read this out loud. Like, that's a lot to say. It looks good on paper. It doesn't always translate the same way if we're speaking it out loud. And that's part of what is hard about copy, is you're still wanting to speak in your authentic voice and not use too much clinical jargon, because clients do not know what on earth Many of these things are. One of my clients asked me, he needed some adjunctive EMDR therapy, and he kept calling it EDM. And then I started calling it EDM. And I was like, well, maybe it's sort of like EDM. Maybe like, I don't know. Maybe there's some correlation there, but it's EMDR. Like, that's what you need.
I'm thinking electronic dance music.
Yeah. I learned a lot about EDM from him because he was like very excited because that's what he thought the intervention initially was I was going to send him to more concerts. As a side note, I used to work with a lot of young 20-somethings. My ideal client has gotten older as I've gotten older. But my point is, copy, we need to find ways to translate it so it still sounds like us but looks good on the page. And that is how most clients are finding their therapist now. They're doing a Google search, or they might be asking somebody like, do you know anybody good? But they're going to end up on your website. And being able to hear what you sound like and to see it in a way that doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, that's a ton of text, is part of what converts people to want to get on the phone with you.
Yeah,
Nice.
Being clear in your copy is so essential. And as I'm listening to you, Jen, I hear that you have a way of being able to simplify copy. And so often therapists overcomplicate it. They try to prove themselves. They try to sell themselves. It becomes all about them, and you lose the ideal client in that. So I'm wondering, what specific tips do you have for clinicians on how to simplify and clarify the copy that they write so the message doesn't get lost?
Yeah.
And before we do that, let's just take a quick moment for our sponsor.
Okay, guys, it's sponsor time. You know what? Instead of reading a script about Gusto's payroll and benefits, we wanted to tell you what small business owners say, the people who use Gusto every day. Here's what one small business owner says. With Gusto, I think of payroll as a 30-second job. The website is so friendly and a joy to use. Friendly payroll? You don't hear that every day. And how about Amy from Utah? Amy says, I love Gusto so much. It's so painless. It's like going to the spa, and we have great options and rates even though we're a super small team. Like going to the spa? Wow. And here's what Mneet says about Gusto's support team. Whenever something comes up, I reach out, and literally 24 hours later, they tell us what to do or assure us that we've already handled it. Smart technology and friendly humans, that's super cool. Honestly, the list goes on, and right now our listeners get 3 months free when they go to gusto.com/PPS. Yep, 3 months of payroll, benefits, administration, and more, totally free. Again, that's gusto.com/PPS.
As a therapist, you're probably too preoccupied with your caseload to want to think about bookkeeping or tax filing. Herd Bookkeeping and Tax is a platform built specifically for therapists that helps you track and improve your practice's financial health. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned clinician or you're in the first year of your practice, Herd will help you to identify areas for growth and streamline best financial practices for your business. When you sign up with Herd, you work directly with financial specialists to track your income and expenses, file taxes online, and grow your business. You'll also receive financial insights such as profit and loss statements and personalized monthly reports, so you can say goodbye to poring over spreadsheets and guessing your tax deductions or quarterly payments. Focus on your clients, and Herd will take care of the rest. You can even ask Dr. Jennifer Kashani, a licensed clinical psychologist based in LA. She says Herd has simplified and streamlined bookkeeping and best business practices in a digestible and accessible way. Having the foundation of Herd for my business had made myself and in turn my patients feel more solid. Plans begin at just $60 a month and can easily be tailored to fit your business financial needs. You can schedule your first consultation at joinherd.com. That's joinherd, HEARD.com. Let's dive in.
So coming back to your question of like, how do we do that? How do we start to simplify our copy that really speaks to our ideal client? I think actually part of where I would suggest people start is write a case study. The other thing that we're sort of talking around, but we haven't talked about explicitly, is how important it is to have an ideal client. And there's a lot of terms that get thrown around when we're talking about niching down or target market. The way I tend to think about it is using Harry Potter as a metaphor. So Hogwarts is a fabulous school, whether you're Muggle-born or Wizard-born. Like, if you are a wizard, you need to go to Hogwarts if you live in the UK. Like, that's where you're going to go. And I remember all the other names of the schools in the various places. So they're going to have specific marketing techniques for children who meet that criteria. That is a huge target market, though. It's very hard to write to. And so generally what we need to do is then niche down. And so we start to niche down and we pick what is our Hogwarts house going to be, right? It could be Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw, there's still a lot of kids there, but they're going to have some common traits, right? They tend to be wit beyond measure. They're smart. They tend to be, I think, a little snobby, Luna Lovegood notwithstanding. Like, they're the smart kids. It's still going to be really hard just to write to Ravenclaw. You can do it, but it's going to be harder for people to hook into the story. And so then you want to pick an ideal client, so a Luna Lovegood. And you're going to write copy to Luna in a way that's really different than you would to Harry, than you would to Neville, that you would to Draco. It's going to help you really synthesize, what do I want to say to her? And what ends up happening is when we speak to one very specific person, we then end up not only capturing the people who are in the Ravenclaw, you're in your niche market, but you start getting people in your target market. You're like, oh, why are you calling me? Like, you don't meet my ideal client at all. Like, I wasn't writing to you, but you're hitting actual pieces that hit the human experience, right? Like, there are things that are going to appeal to everybody, and it's going to be so much easier to write to just that one person. So that was answering a question you didn't ask. But when we have our ideal client, we then can use our clinical abilities to write out a case study and use all the clinical jargon you want to use. If you want to talk about repetition compulsion and EMDR and what your treatment plan would be, write what this person is struggling about. Write a case study like you would for a consult group or supervisor and write it down. And then go through and start to translate, how would you actually say this to the client? If you needed to translate your clinical note, your case study, how would you explain it to them? And then what would they say back to you, right? And so I have an example. I actually wrote it out. It might be too much of a run-on sentence. So we don't generally tell a client, well, as I see it, the root of your comorbidity is the adverse childhood experiences during the latency stage of development. And while many of these ACEs were rooted in household dysfunction, I also think the fact that your parents exhibited the classic narcissistic borderline pairing and scapegoated you as the black sheep led to your major depressive disorder and binge alcohol disorder. My treatment recommendation would include not only medication management by a psychiatric prescriber, but also that we use bilateral stimulation in the form of EMDR to aid you in forming new associations, which will allow you to better enable to engage in reparative experiences, as opposed to continuing to engage in repetition compulsions in your romantic endeavors. And I could go on.
I love, Jen, you're fun. I'm just really captivated, obviously, by your story and your metaphor and your big run-on sentence.
Love it. But like, you guys are never going to say that to a client. I mean, maybe if you're a brand new student, you're like, I need to really prove to you that I know what I'm talking about. And brand new students, you don't need to do that. Clients don't know what you're talking about. Like, you just get to translate.
It's a disconnect.
Yes.
It's a major disconnect.
Yes. So we're probably going to say something more like, dude, your childhood was rough. From the little I know so far, your parents were so caught up in their own stuff that they didn't have time to show up for you and your brother in the ways that you guys needed. And then to top that off, your brother could do no wrong. It seemed like only you could do no right. So it makes sense that you're going to turn to alcohol to numb things out. And then by the time you were 13, you just felt like there was no much use in living at all. And now here in my office, you're frustrated because even though you've come so far, you keep finding yourself dating losers that you can't figure out why you swiped right for on Tinder. And then you find yourself drinking more than you meant to on these first dates and hooking up even when you know you really want to take things slow. So I think in our work together, what could really help is if we were able to collect some solid data about the subtle nuances of what is happening and to sniff out how old patterns might influence what's happening now. Right? There's a story.
Yes, I'm sold. I love it.
Right. And if you guys are clinically aware enough to know that I'm suggesting DBT, right, for a binge drinking disorder that is showing up in unhealthy romantic patterns. Clinically, we can translate that. Clients, they're not trained that way, and they don't need to be trained that way. And so we start to tell the story, and we start to actually speak to clients the way we actually really would.
I love that you use that example, and I loved helping like therapists see like what we do. I know I had a really hard time going from that very clinical research-based writing, that's like what my website looked like initially, to that more conversational and connection. So I love, like, you're just kind of like privileging what's there. It's like, this is what's there, so let's do it. Write that case study. Now show up in your office, and I want you to say what you would say to the client, Yes. And I love like the examples, little exercises. That's amazing, Jen. And we always love when we have guests that just like exude their work, and you totally do. I love your stories, your metaphors, and everything. I always enjoy these podcasts. So thank you so much. And before we continue on, let's just take a quick moment for our sponsor.
Is managing your practice stressing you out? Try Therapy Notes. It makes billing, notes, scheduling, and telehealth a whole lot easier. Check it out, and you will quickly see why it's rated the highest EHR on Trustpilot with over 1,000 verified customer reviews and an average customer rating of 4.9 or 5 stars. You'll notice the difference from the first day you sign up for the trial. They offer live phone support 7 days a week. So when you have questions, you can quickly reach someone who can help. You are never wasting time looking for answers. If you're coming from another EHR, they make the transition really easy. Therapy Notes will import your client's demographic data free of charge during your trial, so you can get going right away. Use the promo code PPS to get your first 2 months for free, or try out Therapy Notes for free, no strings attached, including their very reliable telehealth platform. Make 2021 the best year yet with Therapy Notes.
Let's continue on.
Give us some more tips, Jen. That was really interesting.
So I think it ends up depending on where you are clinically, right? And we were talking a little bit about this before, that I think therapists they can be really brilliant marketers. There's some studies that actually very early marketers creating a lot of the stuff that like suckers us into buying stuff for $19.95. A lot of that actually was based on some of Freud's original like understandings of how human psyche works, right? And what we project. And so you have all of the information you need. It's always about being able to apply it. And so the other thing that I often suggest to people is, again, marketing as a relationship. It's not only about this ideal client, it's also about you and who you are. And one of the things I often see therapists go back and forth between is either I'll just focus all about all the stuff that I'm going to give you. And then if I'm going to talk about myself, I'm going to list a whole list of acronyms of why you should trust me. And I have a couple clients right now who are wanting to become therapists. And they're like, what is the difference between an LCSW and a PsyD, Jen? And they don't even know that it's a PsyD. They're just like a PSYD. Like, what is the difference? And so we end up talking about it because they're pursuing it as a career. But clients don't know that I'm an LPC versus an LCSW and what are the nuances in our training. They don't understand why Brené Brown is so great. And I mean, I tell them often, I'm like, she is our Oprah. Therapist Oprah is Brené Brown. Like, that's who she is. That many people don't have this in knowledge that we have. So it again comes to, can we translate what it is we have to offer to them? And therapists often also don't want to do too much self-disclosing, especially people who are more psychodynamically trained. There is the sense of like, I still want to be neutral. I still want to be objective. And again, you can do that, but still giving them a flavor for who you are and what it is you're actually going to do. And so being able to translate the treatment interventions as much as you're going to translate who you know them to be, what their story will be. And so that's sort of another tip, although it doesn't feel like a tip. It sort of feels like, think about it this way. In terms of actually, how do you start to do that? I like metaphors. One of my clients very sweetly recently said, Jen, do you have a parable for me about that? Oh, I love that. Can I use that in my copy? I said it a little bit more clinically than that, but it was like, that feels so good. Thank you. I normally call them my crazy metaphors. She's like, they're not crazy. They're good parables. And often if we can start to think about what are the parables we have of how we know people function, how we know we function, how do we show up in the room, just starting to write those down. And sometimes we call them clinical interventions, but they're often representative of who we are. Something I did earlier in my career, I don't get to use it quite as often anymore, but I would frame to my younger 20-something women, like, but what would Beyonce do in this situation? Like, really, like, let's tap into this idealized, fabulous figure that I know you really revere. Like, what would Beyonce do? And being able to have some of that kind of language in the copy that's forward-facing gives clients a sense of, oh, this person's going to be able to hang with me. Even when I was writing the little blurb that I read to you all just a few minutes ago, I debated. I was like, is Tinder the thing right now? I think it might be Hinge. It changes every few months. I never know quite what is in. And knowing some of those just little markers that tell people we know your language. I have a colleague that I worked with to help her refine her Psych Today profile. And one of the things we talked about were what are some more affluent, who has a higher fee and wants to build up a full fee practice. What are some markers that people can afford your $250, $300 fee? If somebody's paying for Orange Theory, that's like $90 a month minimum for one class a week. If they can afford that in their early 20s, they probably can afford you. Like, what are some of the markers that you can start to put in to place yourself as part of their, where they normally shop? Is this, I think I'm getting a little off track, but is this making sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really kind of demonstrating like you're aware of their own kind of culture and what's in their world, and you speak their language, which, if we are working with our ideal clients, it's just this really cool symbiotic relationship. It's very reciprocal, right? As we get to know that, because we're immersed in it. Yeah. So Jen, I also know that I love the case study and everything. And I'm assuming that you have kind of a process to help a therapist like put this together, whether it's on a specialty page or a therapist directory. How do you help them figure that out?
So nobody has as ideal of a client as I think they ought to, which is a real judgment on my part. But often when I talk to people, it's very rare for people to be speaking to just one person. And what's hard about it is sometimes we're like, okay, I'm going to narrow it down. I'm going to get my ideal client. Now I'm going to rewrite my entire website. I love to write. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'll write copy all day. Writing a website is exhausting. There's so much to do. And so often people are really resistant, no, I got to get my website. It has to be what I want it to be. And until you're actually knowing that you're writing copy to somebody that's going to convert, it's not worth doing some of the bigger things, even though they're a little sexier to rewrite and have a very fancy website. So often when I'm working with individual coaching clients, and I also have a program that we walk through and we use a therapy directory profile as your case study. Let's write something that's really going to convert for you, and not just convert that you're going to get more calls, but get calls of people that are like, oh, why? How are you calling me? This is so exciting. Yes, I don't want to refer you on. I want to keep you all to myself. When you're starting to get those calls and then people are paying whatever it is that you want your fee to be. I'm a full fee practice. I don't take insurance. And if you don't take insurance, you really do have to be more intentional in marketing generally, whatever path you go. And so I work with people to figure out who their ideal person is, write copy that is going to convert with them. And then once it's converting, then we can move on to create a social media outreach if you want, honing your networking script when you're talking with other clinicians, as well as collateral places that your clients are going to be spending time at, and rewriting your website. And having a killer website has built me, I grossed over $200,000 last year. With clients I love, in a practice that I can be done by 6:00 in the evening and only work 3 or 4 days a week. So it is absolutely doable. But that's how I start to walk people through.
Amazing. I love it. I really do. And, before we hit record today, we were talking a little bit about, Kate and I teach this stuff, right? And I'm always interested in doing trainings and I always feel like I don't know enough, right? And then I'm like, okay, I do. But that little ninja tip that you gave today about speaking to one only ideal client, Kate and I do this exercise when we help people with copywriting is to create their ideal client, give them a name, and then go on Google and find a picture of them, right? Like, who is this? And they often create like really fun, like Depressed Dan and stuff like that. But, as you're talking about it, I can see myself writing to one specific client, knowing, her story and, just focusing. And so now as we go to copyright for the private practice startup, I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm writing that email, like who am I writing to specifically? And I am excited to see how kind of juicy the copy becomes, even more so rather than, even though we have our ideal client, trying to touch everybody, which I find a lot of times like I do because you want to be inclusive, but how much more meaningful. And it's like intimate as I hear you talk about it. Like I'm spying into your world and I know exactly what's going on. And that's like the juiciness of the story, right? Like when we read a story or a fiction or a movie, there's so many emotions in that, like it captivates our five senses. So that's really what I hear you talking about in our podcast today. So fun. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'll just add just a quick note. For those who and I've experienced both of you to be much more creative and I think I'm the same way. I want to dig in and make up people to write stories to. I know not everybody feels that way, and that's okay. As a therapist, you are already privileged to somebody's all of their secrets. In many ways, we get carte blanche with people that I can just ask you whatever it is that comes to mind. I mean, obviously, clinically, we're working to help them work on specific things, but you already have a person. You don't have to create them. They're sitting and they're paying you, and you get to help them. And in helping them, you can start to hone copy that is going to speak to so many more people.
It's
so you don't have to
true.
Create a brand new person.
Yeah, and that's one of the exciting parts that we talk about often is that our ideal clients will teach us everything that we need to know. So the information is there. It's being delivered to you on a silver platter. It's just a matter of, really listening and picking up on those pain points and hopes and dreams and desires and the lingo that they use and really speaking their language. I've loved this topic today, Jen, and I love the metaphors that you brought in and the creative ways of looking at this and finding a way to simplify it, because like we were saying earlier, it can be so intimidating for therapists and it can easily get overcomplicated. So thanks for the tips and for breaking it down for us and our audience. What do you want to make sure that Startup Nation takes away from your message today?
You already have all of the marketing things you need. It's about finding a container of how you start to translate them. And I think often the real problem and the real struggle for people is not actually writing copy. Once you get to the place you can write copy, you can write copy. It's dismantling the defenses you have around marketing. And so I also have a free offering. If anybody wants it, they can go to athinkersguide.com/diagnosis, where you get to diagnose your copy struggles, which are really more of a symptom of the problem. They're not the problem itself, to throw in a little narrative therapy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will have that on our show notes page for you guys. Anything else that you want to share or any other offerings that you have that you would like to?
So I have a course coming up that I referenced earlier. It's Attunement Distilled, which nobody ever gets the very simple pun that it's ad, but it's advertising for clinicians of walking you through my copywriting method, teaching you some of the basic formulas that you can replicate over and over again. People like Apple and all of these biggies that we give lots of our money to use very similar copywriting formulas. So teaching people how to do that so you can write a Psych Today profile or Therapy Den or whatever therapy directory you use that is going to convert for you so you can start to bring in those clients that you long to work for or work with. So that's going to be, the course is going to be offered in March 2021. So they can go to thinkersguide.com/diagnosis shoutout.com/attune to read more about it.
Awesome, Jen. Thank you so much for being here. And Startup Nation, we're going to continue the marketing discussion and really reframing, but we're also going to add in negotiation. Now, we haven't really had a podcast on negotiation, but I am over the moon about our next podcast guest. I don't know if you heard me talk or if you guys are familiar with a gentleman named Chris Voss. He used to be an FBI hostage negotiator, and he teaches people all about how to negotiate with parenting and business. Well, this next woman on our podcast next week, Catherine Hunt, was actually trained by Chris Voss at the FBI. She's a consultant, but she's also a therapist. And we had hopped on the phone and literally talked for 45 minutes before we even did our podcast, and we can definitely talk way more. But she's going to talk about you and your skills like we've been talking about today, negotiation, valuing your worth. It's going to be a fantastic podcast, so don't forget to join us for that one.
And it's time for our Startup Nation Superhero shout out for today, our episode. And it comes from Patrick Casal. Patrick says, Kate and Katie are two incredible women who provide such amazing services for therapists who want to start their private practices. Between their content, podcast, Facebook group, courses, etc., I can't recommend them enough. Thank you so much, Patrick. We really appreciate your feedback, and we hope that you all are enjoying these episodes. We're always trying to create content that really speaks to your struggles and hopes and dreams and desires and goals and all of that. So if there's a topic that you haven't heard yet that you've been wanting to hear, let us know. Or if you would love to be a guest on our podcast, definitely reach out to us. We love hearing from you, and we invite you to subscribe, rate, and review our show. You can do that on our show notes page at the top, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Until then, stay inspired. Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.